Season 2, Episode 8, Seeds to Trees, Brainstorming, with guest author Ashley Funk. Ashley grew up near the mountains where she dreamed of being a fantasy author from a very young age. Imagine how surprised she was when she fell in love with and began writing romantic comedies. When she's not writing or wrangling her kids, she loves going on longish runs, avoiding the laundry, and drinking Dr. Pepper. She now lives in a small mountain town in Utah with her husband and 5 children.
Okay, we are super excited to have Ashley Funk on here with us today. Um, Welcome and thank you so much for being here, Ashley.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, we're really grateful you could join us, and we're excited to talk about finding ideas and taking your ideas, the seeds of ideas, to a full-blown story. So we'll just jump right into the questions. But where do you get most of your ideas?
I don't really have a specific thing I do that a set. I do these things and the ideas flow. Mine usually come from just kind of pieces of everyday life. I get most of my ideas while I'm running. Actually, I go running early in the morning because I have a bunch of little kids, and that's the only time I can get out on my own.
Yeah.
And so there's something that combines you're half awake with the physical repetitiveness of running, that just because my mind is so focused on, running cadence and stuff and not dying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That my subconscious just kind of floats ideas to me kind of that way. But as far as the subject matter of them, it's just things from everyday life. And also I read a lot, both in fantasy and contemporary. And so it's bits and pieces of that. I remember I was reading this and well, what if I turned it on its end? And you start seeing things that you've read and kind of trying to twist and turn, how do I do that trope differently? How do I do this trope differently? And it all just kind of comes out while I'm running in the morning.
Oh, I love I love doing that. I love taking little aspects from books I read and just kind of twisting them to make them my own. That's probably one of my favorite things.
Yeah, and it's kind of with the whole trope thing. Tropes are really big, especially where I'm writing in contemporary romance. A lot of times tropes sell the book, but you kind of have to figure out how to take a trope that everybody loves and make it your own.
Yeah.
So, being able to do that and, asking what if questions about the tropes. For example, you have the best friend's brother, the brother's best friend trope. There you go.
I love that one.
And, most of the time the brother is super not okay with it and is really protective. And so for one of my books, Our Big Fat Big Vacay, I took that trope and I said, well, what if the brother didn't do that? What if the brother was in on it? And, kind of went with that to make it my own version of it.
I love it. That's a really cool idea. That's where I get most of my ideas from books and movies and stuff. That's awesome.
I mean, what's that quote? Art inspires other art or something like that. There's some way more eloquent way of saying that, but
No, I love it.
Just the idea that your work should be inspired by other works. There's not really completely original story, right? Other stories should inspire stories.
That's true.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, so what's some advice that you'd give to people if they're struggling to find new ideas?
I thought a lot about this question, and what I have to say kind of comes with 2 caveats. The first is be kind to yourself, because writing is hard, and publishing, whether you're going the traditional route or the self-publishing route, it's hard. And so we don't need to spend our time and energy on feeling like we're lacking, because you're not. You're doing it, you're writing. So be kind, even when you're in that place where you feel like you don't have a lot of ideas. And the second thing is that I feel a lot of times writers who don't have a lot of ideas feel like they're not succeeding because they don't have ideas falling out of their ears. But on the flip side, being that person who has too many can be just as much as a curse as not having enough.
Yeah.
So like I'm a really slow writer. It takes me 6 to 9-ish months to write a book. Like I said, I have 5 kids, and so most of my time is spent as a mom and not writing. Like I get a very small window of writing time per day. And so it takes me a long time. And like right now I have 6 full-length novels outlined, ready to go, ready to be written. And I love them all equally, and I want to write them all equally. And I can't, because if I just keep jumping around to the one I want to write the most, I'll never actually finish anything. Yeah. So if you're struggling with feeling like you don't have enough ideas, like it is okay, because having too many is also a problem. So not having quote unquote enough is not as big of a problem as you think. So with that in mind, if you're really, really stuck, my favorite thing to do when you just feel like, you know, you're hitting the head on the wall, you can't think of anything, whether it's a new story idea or something you want to happen in your own story that you've already kind of got going, is to look up writing prompts. And I know like a lot of people are like, oh, but that's not my idea, that's not my idea. And like sometimes you can start on a writing prompt and go with it and like use the original prompt, and that's great. Because 2 people writing from the same prompt are never really going to write the same story, right?
Yeah.
But my favorite thing to do is, as you're looking through prompts, and I find mine on Pinterest, I have a whole writing prompt board that I save mine to. I like going through the prompts I have saved and then combining them. Because like on its own, the prompts are good, but I'll share an example from my board right now. I have 3 writing prompts that are, funnily enough, actually located close together on the board. But the first one is, thousands of years ago, dragons agreed to take human form. Today they are holding a secret meeting. The second is, your father the king made a contract with the dragon for 20 years of protection. Now that you are on the throne, the dragon has come to collect his payment. And the third is, the last thing she wanted was a husband. So on their own, all 3 of those prompts are good, and you could create great stories off of those prompts. But if you take them and put it together and kind of read it as one whole prompt, suddenly the questions start abounding of, well, what does the world building look like in this world where dragons are humans? Do humans know the dragons are humans, or is it secret? You know, you can start thinking of these characters. Now you have a dragon protector, a king, and a princess. And, you know, you can kind of start building off of that in a way that you couldn't with just the one prompt individually.
I was gonna say your idea kind of sounded more and more interesting the more you added in prompts as you were describing it. So
yeah, and kind of along the same vein is, if you have, and this works a lot better if you already have your first idea and you're just stuck on where to go with it, is what if? Ask the question, what if, about just about any detail you can think of, like whether it's your world building, your characters, your plot, or your situation. Well, what if this happened? What if that happened? What if everything went wrong? What would the world look like if everything went right? And is that a problem? You know, depending on where you're at and what specifically you're stuck on, what if can be such a great springboard for like just building out things.
I love that. That's
that's great.
Yeah, that's one thing I've been working on, trying to flesh out a few parts of my plot, and kind of going along with that. A good, kind of like what you said, a good question to ask sometimes is like, go to the extremes, like what would happen if everything was terrible, or what would happen if everything was perfect, you know, to kind of like kind of, what's the word, like flush your mind out a little, you know, of all the in-betweens, because sometimes we get wrapped up in all those. So that's a really good idea. I love it.
One of the advices I've heard, I don't know where I heard it, but it's like, if you're stuck, kill a character. Now, that doesn't exactly work in contemporary romance. I mean, you know, you're kind of switching there if you suddenly kill a character and now you've got romantic suspense or something going on. But, you know, I have friends who write fantasy, and I actually started this whole writing journey as a fantasy writer, not as a rom-com writer. And so, you know, that was like a piece of advice I kind of tucked away because I was in that genre where killing a character was a valid option.
Yeah.
So kind of going off of a little bit of what you've said, but also moving on to some of the other questions. So first of all, when you do have so many ideas, how do you narrow it down to which one you want to write? And then once you've picked your idea, how do you flesh that idea out to like a complete novel and outline?
Yeah. I have a color in my notes app. I color coordinate all my notes because I've got things in there from everyday life as well as my writing. And so I have a specific color that's for writing things. And whenever something comes to my mind, I write it down. The biggest lie you'll tell yourself as an author is that I will remember that idea later.
Oh my gosh, I've lost so many ideas to that.
It is especially true as a mother as well, that you will forget it if you don't write it down. And so, like, you know, it could be anything from as small as like a name or a description or a plot idea. Whatever I do, I write it down. Every once in a while, I will go through that and kind of look and see, hey, what do I have in here? And if there's something that stands out to me, I will usually get a hard copy, like a physical notebook, and start writing ideas in it. I have a physical notebook for each one of my ideas that I end up fleshing out, that is more of, you know, the more permanent ones, not just like the little fragments. And in that notebook, I'll just throw everything I know about that particular story, names, places, you know, tropes, whatever. I just throw it all into there. And then I put it on my shelf of to be written. When I'm working on drafting and editing a book. And then after that book I'm working on is done and I'm open up for a new project, I usually pick the one that's calling to me the most. After I wrote like Cabins on Fire, which was my second full-length novel, I had complete plans and started drafting what has become, unfortunately, Neighbors, which is kind of the sequel to Cookie Bait, my debut novel. And originally it was going to be a full-length novel, and it has now been downgraded to a novella that is free for my newsletter subscribers. But when I started drafting that one, thinking that everybody had been asking about what happens to Tessa and Theo at the end of Cookie Bait, I got really, really bad writer's block, like absolutely paralyzing. I couldn't write. I was having really bad imposter syndrome. And I finally just realized that this isn't the book I need to be writing right now. Mm-hmm. And so I went through my shelf of to be writtens. And one thing that jumped out was after one of my idea runs, I guess it was, I had come home and I wrote an entire scene laying in bed while I was trying to breathe again after running. And when I was reading through all my list of stuff and I read through that scene, it was like, that's it. That's the book I'm going to write. And so I picked that one out and then started fleshing it out into what is now Our Big Fat Fake Vacay, which was my third book. So I usually write based on what I'm vibing with at the time. I do have some where, obviously I've done a couple multi-author collaborations this last year where those come first, and whenever I get those ideas or things for books, I just have to write them down and put them on the shelf and say, I'll come back to you later, even though I really love you, because, you know, I made commitments. But when I am free to choose a new project, I just go through them all and pick which one sounds the most fun at the time.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love all of that. That is such a good idea.
Yeah, same. I do have a question. So you talked about writing it down in like a physical notebook. Is there a reason why you do that versus like keeping it on a Google Doc or like a notes app?
I'm a very visual, physical processor. So like in my house, this is really funny because my husband is a computer guy. So he's also of the opinion, why don't you just make a note in, like, make a checklist in your notes app, or why don't you just put that on the digital calendar?
Yeah, I asked this, but I keep like a physical planner because I can't use
Yeah.
digital.
That works for him, but for me, I have to write it down to really have it cemented in my mind. So like I have physical calendars, I write physical lists and all that stuff. So just the whole process of writing it down into a physical notebook just helps me like mull over the idea a little bit better than just typing it out in an app. Because especially when I'm on my phone and that's the only thing I have available, I am much faster writing, like writing out longhand, than I am at typing with my two little thumbs on my phone. But yeah, it helps me process it better. And then I really, it does give me I do have like a notebook that I can go to that only has this particular thing in it, versus, because I do have a Google Doc that has, it's more of like the longer form idea work, which is like where I had the one, I was telling you about the one scene that I ended up pulling into my book. I had copy pasted that whole scene into a doc that had other ideas in it. So like that's my longer stuff. My shorter like names or little snippets end up in my notes app. But it does help me having them separated, so I'm not just like digging through a digital document to find what I need.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I've what I've been bad at is like just writing down like a quick sentence instead of like sort of writing down more details in the moment. Most of my ideas, this is probably really weird, but they come from dreams. My dreams are just really weird. They're just really weird dreams. And usually I'll kind of like pull an idea from that, but I'll usually just kind of write down a quick little sentence, but I don't usually write down more detail. So I like how you do that. That's a good piece of advice.
Yeah. And like I also have things like that. Like I specifically have a note that haunts me in my notes app that all it says is witch trials. And like I can vaguely remember kind of what I was going for with it. Like,
yeah.
Like when you think of witch trials, most of the time you pull up like the Salem witch trials, like, condemning the witch. But
yeah.
The idea was kind of along the lines of the trials you have to do to become a witch, but that's all I remember about it. And that idea did happen to come from a dream as well, funnily enough. And like, I wish I remembered more of it. I wish I would have written more of it down. But then at the same time, I'm currently not writing fantasy. I hope to get back to it one day, because that's the whole reason I started writing when I was a kid. But maybe when I go back to it in the future and I look at that witch trials note, I'll be like, okay, well, that idea I had back then was cool, but now I have this new idea that is springing forth from that particular set of words, and it's even better than what I had back then.
Yeah. Yep. So, okay, so one thought that me and Megan, we talked about this in our last season, when it came to getting ideas, was they kind of usually revolve around one of three things. At least this is for me and her. I don't know if this is for everyone, but around a plot idea, a character, or like a scene. I wanted to see like what it usually is for you and kind of how you start with that.
Yes. I kind of have all thray. I do not have a set. I write the book the same way every single time. Like I said before, I'm just kind of making this up as I go. I have began books and ideas with a character, a plot point, or just a scene. For example, I had, for Cookie Bait, my first book, I had no idea who the characters were or what the full plot was. The only thing I had was the premise of the idea of giving guys cookies in return for dates. That was it. And when I started writing on a writing sprint with my Discord group, that's all I had, and that's all I went off of. But there are other books like Our Big Fat Fake Vacay that did start with a scene, and then a future project that I don't want to spoil too much of, that I'm very excited to write, started with the idea for a character and how this character wound up in the situation he's in. So I'm kind of a bit of all three.
That's interesting. That's cool though, that you just, and even just starting out with a premise that is intimidating. That's not the right word, but like it's exciting. But for me, it's always kind of a little stressful. Like, oh my gosh, this sounds like so much fun. And then I think about everything that has to go with it. So I guess kind of on that vibe, on that question, like how do you flesh out an idea in a way that isn't like overwhelming to you, that you get like, oh my gosh, there's so much I have to do? How do you kind of balance that out?
I take it like one piece at a time. If I have an idea for a scene, I'll take that scene and I'll turn it about 360 and like, what is it about this scene? What's going to happen next? And if I kind of get stuck on the plot, if I'm working on the plot and I get stuck on the plot, I'll go back to that scene and be like, okay, well, these characters in here, and kind of work on the characters. Like, who is my female main character? Who is my male main character? What kind of personalities do they have? And like, once I have that, then it's like, okay, well, let me throw these characters into a different scene that I'm not stuck on. And kind of, it's just doing it a little bit of a time, instead of just, I don't sit down in one big planning session with my sticky notes and my cork board and plot out the entire thing with all of my subplots and stuff. That's just, I'm sure there are people who do it, and like, props to them, the hardcore plotters. I love you guys. I'm kind of in the middle where I really like to plot because it helps me know how to write the next scene. But I also do my fair share of discovery writing where I'll be writing on a scene and my character will jump out at me and say, hey, I'm divorced. That happened with Cookie Bait. I was 3/4 of the way through the draft and my male main character said, hey, I'm divorced. And I ended up rewriting the first half of the book after I finished the draft. So, yeah, when you're fleshing it out, it's like just little bits at a time, and it doesn't have to be done in one session. You can do it a little bit here, you could do a little there, and jump back and forth to what parts are interesting to you at the time. Because nobody likes sitting down of like, I have to write this scene, but I'm really excited about the next scene, but I have to get this one written first. If that's, in my opinion, if that's how you view your writing, then you're just going to dislike writing the entire time, because, you're going to get stuck, and then because you aren't allowing yourself to break free of that and be a little creative and work on it in a different way, you'll get stuck and you won't have a great time.
Yeah, no, I love that. I feel like going with what you're feeling passionate about and like what you're excited to write. Like, I think about, I kind of say it as the scenes you write in your head right before you fall asleep kind of thing. At least for me, those are the scenes that I'm like excited to write. Sometimes you need to just kind of go with that energy and just try writing if you're getting overwhelmed, because you will lose your love of it if you just let yourself sit and get overwhelmed with things.
And I agree. And it does, in your writing, you do come to the point where you have to write those scenes that you don't like. And I find that the easiest way to get past those is trying to switch up the idea of what you had in it and see if it works. Because maybe you're just stuck on it because the idea for that scene just isn't what it needs to be. Or to spend some time pre-writing about it. That's one of my favorite things to do these days, is to, before, like, I have an idea for the chapter or whatever, and I sit down, and instead of just diving in and starting to write the prose for the chapter, I'll take a minute and a paper and kind of like mull over what it's supposed to be, the step by step, and I'll throw in some of those. What if this happened? What if that happened? And that kind of changes how, you do that at the beginning, and it changes how the end of your chapter looks. So being able to do that and brainstorm a little bit on that to give yourself some ideas and give yourself some breathing room almost, to let the end of your chapter flow how it's supposed to be. That also helps those brainstorming sessions can help, like when you're in the middle of those hard chapters.
Oh, I love that. I haven't done free writing for a really long time, to be honest. I usually jump in and just start writing my chapters, so that's a really good idea. I love that. Do you have a specific process on like how you start to build an idea out? I don't know if we've talked about this. We might have.
I know you kind of said like you start at different points with each novel and you take it chunk by chunk. But beyond that.
Yeah, I don't think I have like I do it this way every time, but my process kind of is, whether I'm starting with a scene or with a character, is to just kind of sit and mull with that person. Like for example, a character, and like, you learn about them. I play Dungeons and Dragons, and so character creation is really, really fun for me in that tabletop RPG sphere. Making characters is fun. And so I kind of don't necessarily do the same thing, but when I'm talking, oh man, this makes it sound crazy. When I'm talking to a character, when I'm working with a character, like, you got to know beyond like, oh, what do they look like? So I know how to describe them, but like, what is their occupation, and what is, more about them on how they are on a personality level. Are they grump? Yeah. Are they sunshine? Things like that. And there is a book, a craft book that I absolutely love. It's called Story Genius by Lisa Cron. Mm-hmm. And it is obviously way better at me than describing it. That book takes you on like how to develop a story based around a character. You start with a character and then go from there. So if you have time to check that out, it is an amazing book.
That book is awesome. I've read it. It's awesome.
Yeah. When you're starting with a character, like, you need to know who they are and what they do. And I'm sure you guys have heard of this, their lie. And that lie that about the world or about them as a person that your character believes is what's going to kind of be the center of the internal conflict your main character faces. And that's what's going to push your story forward. Because like, you can have all the external plot in the world, but if you don't have that internal conflict, it's just a bunch of pretty words on a page. So, you have to dig into that character and find what makes them and what makes them tick, and kind of go from there. Because then once you know who they are as a character, it's like, okay, well, and then once again, we're throwing out the what if questions. Well, say you have a bookstore owner who, that's all they do, and they have a lie that they don't have time for love because they're running this bookstore. And you throw out the what if of, well, what if somebody buys their store out from under them? Throwing out things like that, going to those extremes. That's kind of where, from a character, you can develop plot. You can develop things like that. But in addition to that, when I sit down with a story idea, I generally have an idea of what tropes I want to write into it. So that also kind of helps direct and shape who the character is, and what sort of plot points I'll need to have the main characters come together and to further the plot of the story. So but it's like, if you start with the character, you have some ideas for tropes, maybe as you're mulling that over, you get some ideas for scenes, and then you kind of just little by little put those pages together to create your outline, and then write it from there.
I love that. That is super, super helpful. That's awesome. So lastly, we have a few minutes left. Just kind of going along the same train of thought that we've had. How do you help from getting discouraged when your idea kind of gets harder than you imagined it would be at the beginning? So like, as you're going along, you just kind of realize it's a little bit more difficult.
There are a couple things I would do. The first is if you're getting stuck and really frustrated because either you didn't realize the scope or it's just not playing out how you wanted, is to step away and go write something else. It doesn't have to be like go write a whole other book, but like, you know, maybe take one of those other story seeds you found somewhere else, you know, another line or another writing prompt you found, and go write a couple pages just to kind of get your mind out of the muddle it's in. You know, when you're too close to the story, it's hard to step back and see the big picture. Because if you do take that step back after, you know, go write something else, you know, you're out of your world for a bit and you come back to it, you know, you're a step away and you can see, oh, I can see where I missed a plot hole here. And if I go back and fix that, it changes where I'm at, you know, where I got stuck because I went back and fixed this plot hole. Or, you know, I introduced a character and now, you know, there's more dynamics I can do in this scene. So it's not just stuck between these two characters. So that's one of my favorite things to do, is to just go write something else. And then I also just like to read, and it's kind of that same thing of get out of your story and into something else. Give your brain a break from what you're writing.
Yeah.
And the very last thing that helps me when I'm stuck and really in my head about my idea is too hard or my idea isn't working is I talk to my writing friends. I don't have a big circle. I have like 4 I talk to on a regular basis, and I can just go jump in that chat and be like, hey guys, I'm really in my head about this. And I can either start throwing out ideas with them right there, or, you know, I could just talk to them about like how I'm feeling, you know, a little bit of friend therapy there. And a lot of time that leads to, I will have them read what I'm writing. Alpha readers and beta readers are my favorite things in the world, especially when I'm stuck. I had to utilize that on this novella I've been writing that's coming out this summer a lot, just because the idea was too big for the novella. And so I had to pull a lot out. And when I started writing it, it just didn't feel like it was flowing because I had to cut some of the scenes I had planned. And so I gave it to one of my friends and said, you know, I'm just stuck on this. I need a set of eyes on it that's not me, because, you know, when you're the one reading it over and over and writing it over and over and tweaking things, you are going to be seeing what's in your head, not necessarily what's on the page. Yeah. And so having a new set of eyes read what's on the page can more easily point out, oh, hey, I notice I'm not getting development here, and I would like to know more about that. And when you go back and read it, it's like, oh, I could put more description there or something else there that again changes, you know, the ending of your scene, or, you know, things like that. So utilizing your writing friends and your alpha readers and your beta readers, you know, really, really helps.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, thank you so much, Ashley. Lastly, we like to leave our listeners with a challenge. So do you have a challenge for our listeners regarding brainstorming?
My challenge is to go on a walk. You know, whether it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes, or you want to do it by miles, but go on a walk that's longer than like to the end of your driveway and back. Don't turn on music, and take a notebook. And like specifically a physical notebook and a pencil or a pen, because a lot of times if you're like, I'll write that down in my phone, suddenly you have your phone in your hand and you're gonna jump back into the Instagram doom scroll kind of thing. So go out for a walk with no music, and a pen and a paper, and just write whatever comes to mind. It can be a sound, it can be you saw somebody else walking past and like something about their manners and stuck out to you. But just, you know, take 15 to 30 minutes and let your mind wander without any other distractions while doing a physical activity.
I love it. That is awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for being on. We've been super happy to have you. And
yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thank you.